Now, from CBS 4 News, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede, and today we are going to focus on two of the biggest failures of this year's legislative session. The failure to address the rise in homeowners insurance rates and the failure to pass a single reform following the Surfside building collapse. We'll get to homeowners insurance in a minute, but we start with Surfside. 3.5 million people in Florida live in condos, and 60% of those buildings are at least 30 years old. Making sure they are safe and that critical repairs are being done in a timely manner should have been the legislature's highest priority this year, but their efforts failed. Last week, we heard from State Senator Jennifer Bradley, who sponsored the Senate reform bill. The week before, I interviewed State Representative Danny Perez, who carried his own House bill. This week, I speak to State Senator Jason Pizzo, who represents Surfside and was at the site every day as they search for bodies.
It continues to be a tragedy where I think the memory or the recency is still very real for people in my district. The whole east side of the 15 cities that I represent are all condo laden along the coast. And so we drive by it, you walk by it, and it still has recency in memory for all of us. I can't say that for my colleagues, but it's still very real. And even this morning, I'm hearing from one of the fathers of one of the young women that were lost, asking questions and asking for assistance. It's every day.
The effort to try to pass some sort of reform in the wake of Surfside. The bill was in the House. We spoke to Danny Perez a couple weeks ago. The Senate bill was by Senator Jen Bradley. We spoke to her last week. They couldn't come to terms and reach a middle ground, and so therefore nothing was done. Is that disappointing?
It is disappointing, but I think it's disappointing to both of them as well. I think both of them came from a good faith basis, in earnest to try to do something. And on a side-by-side sort of comparison between the bills as they evolved during the legislative session, there was obviously some division, some parts that either side felt to be incompatible with the other and not willing to compromise. But when you asked me about disappointment, I think it was shared by both.
Where it really seemed to break down to me in talking to both Senator Bradley and Representative Perez was on the issue of waiving reserves. And again, just for my viewers, reserves are the money that is collected over a period of time in anticipation of having to make repairs at some point in time, whether it's the roof, whether it's the foundation, whether it's sealing cracks, whatever it is, the state requires that buildings set aside money on a regular basis so that when those repairs are needed, there's money available to do it. The state law also, however, allows for condominium associations to waive those reserves. The House bill said no waiving of reserves. The Senate bill said the only way to waive reserves is if 2/3 of the entire building votes to do so. That seemed to be the biggest stumbling block, was trying to marry those two things. Where do you think it should be?
I think that Representative Perez on the House version had no flexibility whatsoever on waiving. In practical application, Jim, to get 2/3 of all unit owners, not 2/3 of a quorum of the association that's actually meeting, which can be 3 members, 5 members, 7, so to speak, not a majority of those, but to get 2/3 of all unit owners is not an easy task. And I think for many buildings, it's tantamount to effectively or by default, just going to the position of not being able to waive. Because to get that kind of participation is a very high bar, or at least it suggests a very deliberate decision to waive it, and it better be qualified to do so.
When I talked to Representative Perez and Senator Bradley, their initial statement to me was, we'll try again next year. When I pressed both of them, I said, why not continue the discussions now? Why not see if you can come to some sort of middle ground and suggest that it be taken care of in a special session, maybe along with homeowners insurance rates, and deal with it that way? Would you support a special session? Would you support trying to continue to work on this now and try to bridge the gap between the two of them?
Absolutely, yes. And I think, and I saw when you had Senator Bradley on about a week ago, and the week before that, you had Representative Perez on, both indicating that they'd continue to work towards it. And then I reached out to both of them collectively and said, invited them even into the district and said, can we work this out over a weekend? And they were both quick to say, we're working on it. We're going to get something done. So I'm with you. There's a number of bills that get close to the finish line that seem close to be able to passing. And sometimes they're sort of academic or they're tax related or they're, somehow finance related. But when you're talking about bills that have to do with life and safety, another year or we'll kick the can down the road for another year. When you asked me if I was disappointed, the answer is yes. But again, I think Representative Perez and Senator Bradley were also disappointed that nothing passed because you let a year pass and you're talking about things that involve people's lives. You never want any time to waste.
It seems like there is ways to try to meld these two, but if the House version and the House stays with the position, it's either never waive reserves or nothing at all, that's not a good position to take. I'm curious your thoughts.
I think to ramp up and what's effectively going to be accelerating, remember, it's sort of a number of years of go slow and now it's hurry up. Now, who's at fault? It's the artificial, I think, suppression of association fees or what appropriate reserves should have been over the years. But again, it's sort of a perennial bad habits that are now sort of catching up with you. And I consider buildings to be almost like living, breathing animals. This is not in a vacuum. It's not two-dimensional. These things age and they deteriorate and they have maintenance issues, which are accelerated or exacerbated, as we know, by being close to a coastline or having a high water table. There are other differences between the House and the Senate bill that extend beyond reserves, and I have some concerns as well, only because of my experience even well before the Surfside tragedy.
Well, give me an idea. What are some of those?
The capacity for the state agency, the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, to adequately fund and follow through with investigations. That's been the bane of every sort of condo association or owner's existence ever since I got in office and before I got in office. You file a complaint as it relates to records or financial statements or any of the above as a condo owner. And it's a very frustrating process because DBPR has very limited resources. Each condo owner in the state of Florida, whether they know it or not, is baked in like $4 a year that goes up and it's supposed to be kept by the agency to use for investigations, to use for arbitration, and carrying out their role and responsibility. At one point, I think they only had 33 agents for 1.5 million condos. It's just woefully inadequate. The bigger issues for me outside, I think reserves, we can get to it. There's many different ways to convey value or to be able to have a line of credit, all different types of vehicles for that and instruments. For me, my concern was the responsibility, the added responsibility, the new responsibility that would be added on either to a local building official in one bill versus the agency in another. Most of the bills that we see, they have what's called fiscal, right? There's a cost associated with carrying out a bill. This session, one of the bills was on election security. So the bill called for the addition of 15 full-time employees to go to FDLE for these inspections, for these investigations. Neither of these bills had sort of any cost or fiscal associated with carrying out these roles. Now, if I represent Miami Beach, Surfside, Bal Harbor, Bay Harbor, North Bay Village, Sunny Isles Beach, these are obviously explosive, large, heavy density condo areas, and you're laying upon a building official a lot of responsibility in one bill or a state agency in another, which from practical purposes, it sounds nice in theory, but they really don't have the resources. When you go from just 2 counties that have a recertification model to all counties, and you're putting a large burden on a state agency that is already woefully underfunded for their existing tasks, that was a bigger concern to me.
Given the differences, can they come together, do you think, at some point? Is it reasonable to think that these differences can be ironed out in a timely enough manner to include in a special session this year?
It should be. They should absolutely be able to do so. Listen, even the very first bill, there was three versions of the Senate bill, a couple versions of the House bill. Even if we just did what was in the Senate bill, and it really was just a placeholder, right? You can put something into bill drafting, and then it pops up and appears and it's published, and that was reducing the recertification or the inspection of a building, a number of years lower. Different on both sides. It was 20 years of age and then 7 years thereafter. In the Senate bill, it was 25 and then 10 thereafter in the House bill. Any one of those is substantial. Even just that one point. I mean, there's side by side probably 22, 23 different points and treatments of different issues. Anything would have been an improvement. So when you say special session, obviously the governor can call one. A number of House and Senate members also agreeing on it can call it.
I mean, I've now talked about this issue the last 3 shows. Am I wrong to focus so much attention on this issue?
You're not. And remember, and I mean this with all due respect to my colleagues in the Senate, many of whom come from agricultural, centric areas, from single family detached homes. I think I might be the only senator out of the 40 who lives in a condo with my wife and kids. So it's a daily issue for me. It's a daily occurrence for me when I go to bed and when I see my neighbors and when I walk down the street. I'm walking out of a condo and looking at other condos. And so I'm respectful and mindful of that. It's not, incredibly sort of, I don't want to say that it's not important. It's just not pressing on an everyday basis.
3.5 million Floridians live in these buildings. That's a lot of Floridians whose lives would be affected in a good way if they could come to some sort of agreement up in Tallahassee.
Yeah, it's critically important. But I will tell you this, and I said this early, and I think this. You've seen the governor's influence on a number of bills or policy or theory or philosophy, however, legitimate or not. But there was no overriding pressure or influence whatsoever from the governor's office on condo issues this session.
When we come back, we turn to homeowners insurance. Stay with us.